Welcome to the deep dive. Ever wondered what truly makes a nation a nation? What gives a country the right, the real right to make its own rules, control its territory, and sort of deal with the world on its own terms? Today we're going to unpack a concept it's absolutely foundational to international relations. State sovereignty. It sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Like a state is its own boss. But as you'll find out, it's actually way more complex and dynamic than that simple definition suggests.
Exactly. We're going to dive deep into the very essence of what gives a state its supreme authority and how it governs itself within its own borders. We'll explore its fundamental features, the sometimes surprising ways it can be classified, and maybe most importantly, the powerful internal and external forces that can actually limit it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So our mission here is to give you a really comprehensive understanding of state sovereignty, moving beyond, the basic textbook definition to reveal its fascinating complexities and real-world implications. Think of it as peeling back the layers on one of the most critical ideas shaping our world so you feel truly well-informed. Let's get started. So let's kick things off with the core idea. When we say a state is sovereign, what are we really talking about?
Well, at its most fundamental level, sovereignty refers to the supreme power of a state. It's unrestrained by any other law or power from the outside. It's basically the ultimate authority a state has to govern itself and make decisions within its territory without, anyone else telling it what to do.
So it's like being the undisputed boss in your own house. That sounds incredibly powerful. But what does that look like in practice? I mean, our sources lay out 7 distinct characteristics, right? 7 pillars that define a sovereign state. And these aren't just abstract ideas. They're sort of the pillars holding up a nation's independence.
That's absolutely right. These features aren't just definitions on a page. They're what allow a state to actually function as an independent player on the world stage.
Hmm.
Without them, well, claiming or maintaining true sovereignty gets pretty difficult.
Okay, let's dive into the first one. Absolute authority. This implies the state has the ultimate power within its borders, making laws, enforcing them, handling foreign relations, managing internal stuff, all without being controlled by other states or entities. It's like the top dog, legislatively, executively, judicially.
Yeah, exactly. But for that authority to really mean something globally, you need the second pillar, recognition. Other states, international bodies, they have to actually acknowledge a state as independent, as capable of exercising that authority.
Yeah, okay.
This is why you see those big diplomatic fights over disputed territories. It's not just symbolic. Recognition isn't just a polite nod. It's really fundamental for a state's ability to operate, make treaties, truly exist in the international system.
Right. Then there's territorial integrity. This sounds pretty clear. It's the state's exclusive right to control and defend its geographical area, land, water, airspace, and manage its borders without outside interference. Kind of like a state's physical bubble, right? Don't cross the line.
Precisely, the physical bubble. And tied very closely to that is self-determination. Sovereign states get to choose their own political systems, their economic path, their social structures. They develop their own policies, pursue their own national interest without someone else dictating terms. I mean, this principle has totally reshaped the world map over the last century, often through some really intense struggles for independence.
Yeah, absolutely. And following directly from that, and maybe one of the principles we hear about most, is non-interference. The idea that no other state or external entity should meddle in a sovereign state's internal affairs. It sounds straightforward, but boy, is that principle tested all the time by global crises, human rights issues, even humanitarian interventions.
Well, constantly tested. And what's also interesting here is that sovereignty is generally seen as permanent. It's usually considered a lasting feature of a state. It's supposed to stick around even if governments or leaders change. A coup happens, a revolution, an election. The state itself and its sovereignty, theoretically, is meant to endure. But, like you said, that permanence really faces a test when governments change violently or when the international community debates stepping in. It's a theoretical ideal meeting practical friction.
Okay, and the last pillar.
The last one is that it's considered inalienable. Sovereignty can't just be taken away or given up without the explicit agreement of the state or its people. It's seen as a fundamental right belonging to the state and its people, not something another power can just seize.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got the core idea, supreme power, and these 7 key characteristics. But clearly it's not always so black and white. It's not a static, one-size-fits-all thing, is it? Our sources point out that sovereignty can actually be classified in some surprisingly different ways.
Yes, and this is really crucial for getting the nuances of state power. These classifications help us understand the different sides of sovereignty, both in theory and, importantly, in practice. They show the complexities and the evolving nature of how countries interact today.
Right. So let's start with the source of sovereignty. There's this dichotomy, often linked to A.V. Dicey.
Yeah.
On one side, you have popular or political sovereignty. This is where the ultimate political power rests with the people, with the electorate, with you listening. It's your right to vote, run for office, criticize the government, all that.
Exactly. And then, contrast her with that, is legal sovereignty. This is the authority that the electorate entrusts to specific government institutions. Think parliament, the courts, the executive branch. This authority is exercised on behalf of the people, but crucially, it's within the framework of established laws and regulations.
Huh?
So while the people might hold the ultimate theoretical power, they legally delegate the day-to-day governing power. It creates this interesting dynamic, sometimes a tension between the two.
Got it. People power versus institutional power, kind of. Okay, next up, recognition of sovereignty. This seems related to that pillar we discussed. We have de jure sovereignty. That's the legally recognized, legitimate authority of a state, right? Based on formal recognition by other countries, following international legal norms. It's like the official stamp of approval.
Precisely, the
yeah.
official stamp. But then there's its counterpart, de facto sovereignty. This refers to the effective control and governance a state exercises over its territory, even if it lacks that formal legal recognition or legitimacy from the international community.
Ah, okay, so boots on the ground versus the official paperwork.
Kind of, yeah. This distinction really helps us understand situations like, say, historical civil wars or territories controlled by groups not recognized internationally. They might effectively run the place, de facto sovereignty, but they struggle for legitimacy and full participation globally without that de jure recognition. Is the difference between maybe having the keys and actually owning the house legally.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, moving on to the degree of sovereignty. There's absolute sovereignty. This sounds like the classic image: unrestricted, supreme authority over everything within the state's territory. Total control.
That's the ideal, maybe. But the reality, more often than not, is limited sovereignty. This involves constraints, limitations on a state's authority. And these can come from lots of places: international agreements they've signed, regional organizations they belong to, or even their own domestic constitution putting checks on power. So yeah, even supreme authority isn't always totally limitless in the real world.
Right, which leads nicely into the next one, the scope of sovereignty. We've got internal sovereignty. This is all about the state's authority and control over its domestic affairs, right? Governance, law enforcement, decision-making inside its own borders, basically keeping order at home.
Exactly, keeping the house in order. And its vital partner is external sovereignty. This relates to a state's independence and autonomy in how it deals with other states, its ability to make treaties, engage in diplomacy, join international organizations. It's how a state, shows its face to the rest of the world as an equal player.
Okay, makes sense. Internal versus external focus. And finally, the distribution of sovereignty. There's exclusive sovereignty. That sounds like what we mostly think of, the sole authority, one state, one boss over its territory and decisions.
That's the traditional model, yes. Yeah. But we increasingly see situations involving shared sovereignty. This refers to cases where multiple actors, maybe international organizations or regional bodies, actually share certain aspects of governance or decision-making with individual states.
Oh, like the EU.
The European Union is a prime example, yeah.
Yeah.
Member states have voluntarily pooled some of their sovereignty in specific areas, trade, currency for some, to achieve shared benefits. It's a fascinating evolution of the concept.
Okay, wow. So we've laid out what sovereignty is, its key features, and all these different ways to classify it. But here's where it gets really complex, and maybe, like you said, counterintuitive. Even something as fundamental as state sovereignty actually has real-world limits. This is where the theory hits the road, so to speak.
That's exactly right. The sovereignty of a state isn't absolute in practice. It's subject to both internal and external controls. And this often surprises people who think of sovereignty as this, untouchable absolute power. It's really more of a constant negotiation.
Okay, let's break those down. Let's start with the internal controls, things limiting power from within the state. First up, constitutional limitations. A constitution isn't just some old document, is it? It sets up the structure, the powers, the boundaries of government. It puts checks and balances in place, often to protect citizens' rights. So it fundamentally limits the arbitrary use of state power, making sure even the supreme authority follows rules.
Absolutely. The Constitution acts as a fundamental internal check. Then there's the very real influence of pressure groups and public opinion. We see this play out all the time, don't we? Public opinion, voiced through the media, through protests, strikes, maybe legal challenges. It can genuinely force governments to act or not act in certain ways. It definitely reduces their ability to just act independently, making them respond to the people they govern.
Yeah, people power again. And related to that, the final internal control listed is political limitations. This is about elections mainly. Citizens choosing or removing leaders holds the government directly accountable. To stay in power, governments generally have to respond to public demands and priorities, right? So, yeah, even within its own borders, a state isn't totally free to do whatever it wants. It's accountable to its own people, its own laws.
Precisely. Those internal checks are vital. Now, moving to the external controls, the limits coming from outside the state. A huge one is membership of international organizations. When a state joins, say, the UN, the World Trade Organization, or a regional group like the African Union or ASEAN, it often explicitly agrees to abide by the rules and decisions of that organization. This means voluntarily giving up or pooling some degree of sovereignty in exchange for the benefits of cooperation, security, or trade within that shared framework.
Okay, that makes sense. You give a little to get a little. And then there's a very specific and kind of strange one. Diplomatic immunity. This is the principle that gives diplomats legal protections in the country where they're posted. They can perform their duties without fear of being prosecuted locally, even if they technically break local laws. Now, this effectively limits the host state's sovereignty over people within its territory, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's a direct, albeit accepted, limitation. But it's seen as a necessary trade-off. It's a universally accepted norm because it allows international relations and diplomacy to function smoothly. A small sacrifice of sovereignty for the much larger goal of global communication and negotiation.
Right. Okay. What else limits sovereignty from the outside?
Well, a massive force, especially today, is globalization. Just the sheer interconnectedness of countries through trade, finance, communication, culture. It means states aren't islands anymore. They often have to adapt their policies, align them with international standards or agreements, just to function effectively in the global economy or deal with shared problems like, say, pandemics or climate change. This economic and cultural web inherently puts practical limits on purely independent action.
Yeah, you can't really go it completely alone anymore. And overarching a lot of this, I suppose, is international law itself. States are bound by this complex web of treaties, conventions, customary practices. These agreements restrict what states can legally do and require them to comply with international norms on everything from human rights to trade rules to how you treat the oceans.
It's a vast body of law, and yes, it fundamentally shapes and limits state behavior. What's really fascinating, I think, is seeing how states are constantly performing this balancing act, balancing their own sovereign power and national interests with the undeniable need for cooperation, for adhering to this shared global framework. It's this constant dynamic tension between independence and interdependence.
So, okay, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, for our listeners, as you kind of navigate news about global events? We started with what seemed like a simple idea: a state has supreme, unrestrained power. But now we've painted a much more nuanced and dynamic picture, haven't we?
We really have. We've unpacked that sovereignty isn't just some static definition. It's this complex interplay of, well, internal democratic forces, international recognition, global economics, the binding power of international law. It's really a continuous negotiation between authority and responsibility, and it's constantly being reshaped by the world around us.
Yeah. You now understand its core features from that idea of absolute authority right through to it being inalienable. You get the various classifications, like that interesting difference between de jure, the legal kind, and de facto, the practical control kind of sovereignty. And you see the powerful internal and external forces that are always pushing and pulling at its boundaries.
Which I think leaves us with a really important question for you to consider. In this world, that's just getting more and more interconnected, where huge challenges like climate change, pandemics, economic crises, they demand collective action. How much truly absolute sovereignty can any state realistically maintain today? And maybe more importantly, what does this evolving understanding of sovereignty mean for the future of international cooperation? And yes, even for international conflict.
Definitely something to mull over the next time you hear a world leader talking about national interests, or you see countries trying to grapple with these massive global challenges together, or sometimes failing to.